Okay, well, listen, good evening. Welcome to the February 28th, 2024 Long Range Planning Committee meeting on the preliminary 2023-2024 CPHD Planning Division Work Plan or Work Program. We'll be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7, 2022. All members of the LRPC are, actually they're not. They are participating both virtually and in person. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the electronic Teams link provided on the LRPC webpage, the county's events calendar, and the email notifications sent to LRPC or ZOCO email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. And for our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. We will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active for two purposes: to assist participants who need technical support and for participants who pose brief or clarifying questions to the larger audience. While the clarifying questions will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment may only do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat may not be used for that purpose. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. Also, we'd like to remind everyone to speak up in the room slowly and clearly and point your mouth to the microphone to allow virtual participants to hear you. Additional notes for everyone: if commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise the virtual hand in Teams. I, as well as staff, will monitor the video feeds. Do we have any commissioners joining us virtually or by phone today?
This would be Peter.
He hasn't joined. Okay, so we do not have any commissioners joining. Okay. So a couple additional notes for our members of the public who'd like to provide feedback and comment. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LRPC's agenda items are not public hearings, therefore public comment is at the chair's discretion. We will call on speakers at the end of the meeting after the committee discussion has concluded. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. Speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening. In-person attendees, please add your name to the speaker list on the table. And virtual attendees, please indicate in the chat that you'd like to provide comment and your name will be added to our list of speakers. Natasha will acknowledge your request in the Teams chat. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has ended. As an alternative, public comment may also be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC website. You know, we love that. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether it is written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Natasha. Well done. All yours.
That's the only thing on the agenda. Yeah. So, Anthony, did you want to do a roll call?
Oh, we can actually. Let's go around the room and say hello. Yes.
The Evagley Planning Commission.
Eric Berkey, Planning Commission.
Anthony Cusarelli, Planning Division.
Benson with the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission.
Bill Richardson, President, Office and Run Civic Association.
Jim Humphrey, Planning Commission.
Karen Gamato, Planning Commission. Jean Hinsroth, President, Leeway O'Reilly Civic Association.
Tony Strider, I'm with the Planning Commission too.
Daniel, we're Planning Commission.
Natasha, I'm also with the Planning Commission.
Devash Patel, Planning Commission. Thank you. Okay, Anthony, now.
We also have several
Oh, wait.
at least staff.
We do have staff on? Okay, thank you.
I can acknowledge them or they can.
Look, here's Jen. Hi, Jen.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Jennifer Smith with the Planning Division.
Good evening, Chris Kreider, Urban Design Division Section.
Oh, I was waiting for you, Aaron. I'm Kelly Brown, comprehensive planning.
All right, I'll follow you, Kelly. I'm Aaron Schreiber with the current planning section in the planning division.
Hi, everyone. Matt Pfeiffer, Planning Division.
Hello, everyone. Rana Abu Ghazali, Comprehensive Planning.
And then do we have Peter on from planning on virtually yet?
So the commissioners.
Okay, and then I see that we have Chris from transportation. David is on. David, do you want to turn on your camera and say hello? Chris, you can as well.
No, I don't actually have a camera on this computer, but I'll say hi. Though I don't believe I'm actually on this LRPC.
Okay.
Yeah, same here. I'm here as myself, not as FNRC representative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hey, it's good to see you, Jane. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
I think we have everybody. Is that right? Okay, well, third time's a charm. Anthony, all you.
Devanshi, thank you so much. As I'm pulling up the presentation, very happy to be here this evening in this LRP for this very important LRPC conversation. And I'm glad to have the support of many of our team members here for this presentation and conversation. So the subject of tonight's conversation is our preliminary proposed work program for the planning division for calendar years 2024 into 2025. And we frame it that way essentially because while we expect to complete a lot of important work this year, we expect that some of it will be ongoing into next. We are having this conversation here today, roughly 2 weeks or approximately 2 weeks before a March 14th work session with the county board that will focus on the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development's budget for fiscal 2025. And so it's always helpful from our perspective to be having and formulating our conversations on the work program in the context of the proposed budget. So we're happy here this evening to really share with you our preliminary outlook regarding some of the upcoming projects that we see in the year ahead, to address any questions on anything you see here tonight, and also to take your feedback, which we then can take back and further consider over the next couple of weeks before we make a presentation to the county board. In terms of an outline for tonight, we'd like to begin with reintroducing you all to the organization of our planning division, highlighting key accomplishments from calendar year 23. We'll then cover key considerations that really heavily shapes and influence what you'll see tonight in terms of our preliminary work program. We'll then dive into a outlook on the development review side. We're tracking in terms of potential or active projects, as well as additional supporting work in that space. We will then share areas of work that we work in initiatives that we are advancing under the umbrella of commercial market resiliency, in real partnership with Arlington Economic Development and also the Director's Office, our department. That'll then allow us to move forward into highlighting some of our key long-range planning and growth management initiatives that we're excited about in the year ahead. And we will then walk through our priorities for zoning studies, zoning ordinance amendments, or at least those that have not been covered already through the commercial market resiliency or CMRI. And we'll close with planning division support on the work of some of our partner agencies or departments and divisions, and things that we do really in support of good governance. So to start here first, we see the structure and personnel comprising our planning division. And so we are one of 6 divisions within the Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development. And as a division, we are essentially organized among 3 core sections or teams. Our current planning team is managed by Aaron Schreiber, who is further supported by Site Plan Section Supervisor Matt Pfeiffer, both here this evening. Our comprehensive planning section is managed by Jennifer Smith, with additional support by comprehensive planning section supervisor Kelly Brown. And our urban design team nested here in the middle or centrally is led by section supervisor Chris Kreider. And I should note that our team's ability to generally stay on track on a day-to-day and weekly basis really is in large part thanks to the great administrative support that we receive by both Giselle Johnson, who's also the Planning Commission clerk, and Joanna Harrison, and both of you are familiar, both of which or whom are familiar faces that you all see at your monthly hearings in the board chambers upstairs. So when at full strength, we have a complement of 29 full-time equivalents. We are currently comprised of 27, and this is largely due to 2 positions that have been vacant really since the summer and fall timeframes of 2023. Both of these vacancies are, as shown here, are associate planner positions. And per the county manager's presentation on the proposed budget for fiscal 25, these 2 vacancies are being put forward at this time as proposed reductions. So on a more positive note, I would be remiss if I didn't just take a moment and recognize and thank really the entire team and all the work that they do together with the commission, with the community, with our colleagues, really for this community. Really just so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with such excellent professionals who really truly care about the work that they do and truly care about making Arlington a better place. So wanted to nest that more positive remark in between taking a closer look at our historical staffing trends, and really just putting some additional context in terms of where we are and where we've been. So over the past few years, in accounting for non-supervisory planners, primarily principal planners, associate planners, and development master planners, between fiscals 21 and 23 as adopted, we were approximately 22 planners in our team. Last year with the adopted budget, there was 1 reduction of an associate planner, and that brought us down to 21. And you can see here on the bottom line, as currently proposed in the manager's budget, 2 fewer associate planners, bringing us to a total of 19 if they get approved or adopted in April as part of the budget. So just wanted to put that context out there, really because it presents the staffing trends that you see here, the potential pattern you see, really does have an influence on our ability to move forward all the important work that we've identified, and it can affect the pace of that work, and it can also affect other aspects of it. And so we recognize that risk. There are some mitigating strategies, which we could just touch upon here in terms of how we would manage if we continue to see the steady or increased levels of work, particularly on the development side, on the current planning side. We may need to think differently about how we staff the review of all of those applications, opportunities to perhaps think across section lines. But we also may need to, I think, level set in terms of the pace of that review and some of the review periods and durations being a little bit longer than what we've traditionally been able to accomplish. And then before advancing, just really want to take a moment to highlight and look back at 2023, which was, I think by any measure, a very busy yet productive year overall. On the development side, the county board approved 14 major site plan and use permit developments. When you add them all up, they total more than 3,800 new residential units entitled, which is one of the highest numbers we've seen in quite some time. The board also adopted general land use plan and zoning ordinance amendments and housing options in March. later in the year in November, it adopted the Langston Boulevard Area Plan, establishing a new vision and policy guidance for that corridor. For zoning studies, the board approved 5 policy-based sets of zoning amendments on various topics. And again, these are not including those that have really been nested under the larger umbrella of commercial market resiliency or CMR. And then our team worked with many others to complete the future of outdoor dining study and take the lessons learned from TOSAs and the pandemic moment and era, and really update and build in additional flexibility into our outdoor dining environments to expand that resiliency going into the future. And just yesterday, our county board was able to announce and recognize the winners of the 2023 Design Arlington Awards program. That's a program we continue to hold every other year to really celebrate and recognize, and highlight a lot of the great design accomplishments we've seen in our community. Those are just a few highlights of everything we've accomplished last year. But looking ahead to 2024, really what we'll cover tonight and preliminary work program proposed is really influenced by 5 key considerations. The first is, the need to continue to timely accomplish our non-discretionary work, largely site plan review, use permit development review, use permit applications, administrative changes that we all are working as efficiently as we can to process and allow projects to move forward in a timely fashion. The second, as we think about the long-range planning initiatives and work that we can undertake, a key priority for us is really continuing to advance and work on those initiatives that were on the work program from last year for 2023 before really entertaining and getting into details about adding future new initiatives. As the commission well knows, with many of the amendments that have come before you, commercial market resiliency is one of the key priorities for the county manager. And so it is by extension a key priority for us and our partners in Arlington Economic Development. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific work areas that we are currently advancing at this time and what we see ahead around the corner. And then here you can see the image in terms of the racial equity lens and ensuring that we're applying that to all of the work that we do and how we go about selecting the work that we do, the projects and initiatives we're putting forward as part of this work program. And then finally, I spoke briefly to, reflecting upon the potential for more limited staffing resources. And so how we manage that and some of the timeframes that you'll see associated here are really intended to reflect at least the current thinking or what's currently anticipated as far as the proposed budget and staffing levels, but still wanting to grow staff capacity, especially through professional development training. So looking at this slide, we're not going to go in detail, but want to just acknowledge that over the past 14 months, the county board has adopted or approved, 16 major site plan and use permit development proposals. This commission is well aware of this volume because most, if not all, of these projects are projects that have come before you as well. So that's the good news. And when we look ahead, with the other categories or buckets we see on this slide, really speak to a array of applications that are at various stages. They're either active site plan applications that you see here in green, preliminary applications that are going through the intake process as we speak. We have a couple conceptual site plans that we are in the process of reviewing and responding to. And then, as we always do, we have conversations or we have information coming our way where it allows us to kind of estimate how many future projects we should be anticipating. And so that number of 14, it shows up in that blue box. So I think the key headline here is when we were having this conversation a year ago, when you take all of those pipeline applications together, the number was totaling about 34 plus or minus. And when we did that exercise or that computation again now, it's essentially holding steady. It's 33 plus or minus. And so what that tells us is, depending on, again, individual decisions by applicants in terms of their readiness to move forward, we can expect to see, or should expect to see, a similarly busy and active year ahead in this space. We can come back later, obviously, to any of these slides for more questions and discussion. But also, in addition to the development project review, the current planning team will continue to progress several procedural and regulatory updates in a number of areas. This will include things such as the latest update to the 4.1 administrative regulations addressing site plans, as well as the site plan condition updates. We're also excited to take on updates to the reference guide for landscape standards, really prioritize that as something to accomplish for the year ahead. And the special glove study process refinements, which I suspect we'll talk more about this evening, shows up here, but it also shows up later in commercial market resiliency. And it's certainly something that we've talked about to date. On the lower half of the slide, really just highlighting and calling attention here, additional activities that are really part of our standard day-to-day, whether it's including application acceptance and the customer service support that we provide to applicants, the reviews of minor site plan amendments and use permit applications, as well as scheduled reviews that go before the county board. I spoke earlier to administrative change and landscape plan reviews, which also are addressed by our team. Something we'll be talking a little bit more about Monday night at the March meeting or hearing is really the fee analysis and how that's informed recommended fee amendment changes as part of the fiscal 25 budget. And happy to talk more then in particular about the relationship, what we learned in that analysis, and what we are looking to address now and perhaps looking to address later this year as we go into the fiscal 26. On commercial market resiliency, just to provide a high-level overview, you can see a list of discrete work areas here that had, many of which, if not all, have been displayed in previous presentations on CMRI. And I think the key point here is, on the one hand, not all of these work areas are being led by planning, but several of them are. And those which planning is not leading, we are certainly playing a support role in one way or the other. And so this will take up a fair amount of our staff time and capacity in the year ahead. The other point I want to note here is that, some of this CMRI work will result in, perhaps amendments or updates to the zoning or other regulations. But there is a portion of this body of work that really is more on the administrative side. And so it's, how do we look at our own processes and look for ways to improve them, enhance them, build greater efficiencies. And so that's to say there's things that we will be doing and are doing in commercial market resiliency that may not come before the commission, but perhaps more so applicants may feel the differences made through this work. That's a big hope that we have moving forward. Transitioning to long-range planning and growth management, our top 2024-2025 priorities really include managing the land use evaluation for the master financing and development plan related to Barcroft Apartments, progressing the first phase of the comprehensive plan update, and really reviving and completing the multifamily reinvestment study and any related zoning ordinance amendments. You can see the target completion timeframes here for each of these priority areas. That's our best thinking at this point. And again, each of these items were in our 2023 work program. We've been able to move forward on some of them and are looking forward to making major progress this year ahead. In briefly to note, we have the annual expanded housing options report. And so when that action was taken back in March, there's a requirement or directive to generate an annual report. So we'll be publishing the first edition of that this fall. And we are just flagging or noting additional implementation steps for Plan Langston Boulevard, really addressing some of the more constrained sites as something that we would like to prioritize as well, but we haven't put a specific timing on it at this time. And then down below, the special bluff studies that are currently active in terms of Melwood, and anticipating bringing that forward this spring for the commission and the board's consideration. And then this June, we'll be having the next sort of deadline for applications, which could potentially lead to tier 1 reviews. Just all depends on if and how many applications we. And so just a little more detail on each of our 3 top priorities and why they're important, and why they're being held up as priorities here. Barcroft Apartments, as I'm sure everyone here knows, a tremendous generational opportunity. It's already 2+ years kind of in the making since the property sold, and the county and Amazon and others put in some financial support into making this happen. So, I think it shouldn't be lost that one of the primary outcomes of this will be 1,335 committed affordable units for 99 years. That is outstanding. And in order to get there, right, there's physical and financial pieces that really need to come together in space and in time to be able to support that. And so as part of the deal, part of the arrangement, the property owner, Jair Lynch, was required to submit a master financing and development plan, which they did submit their first draft of that back in October of 22, excuse me. Yeah. October of 22. And from that time, we knew that there was going to be a need to evaluate that the development portion of that MFDP, or like the land use portion of it. We were going to have to evaluate that against the county's adopted policies for Columbia Pike and for this portion of the Barcroft area in particular. And we were going to have to assess, where are the areas of consistency, and then where are the areas of deviation. And so we're at that stage now. I think we're actually 2 meetings in with an extended working group of the advisory working group of the OG of the form-based code, really to help staff as we work through this assessment and evaluation, with a summertime target to be able to bring back to the commission and board what recommendations there may be for any policy updates. But the things we're looking at, what is the boundary between the conservation and the redevelopment areas on the property? What should they be? How should transportation and parking work in the context of this development in comparison to adopted plans, policies, looking at the public space and natural areas, as well as the urban design component. So by this summer, we're working towards identifying what updates might be needed to policies. And then we'd spend the second half of 2024 really on the more technical side, progressing the code amendments that would be necessary to really facilitate and support those policy updates. The second long-range priority, the comprehensive plan update, and we can certainly talk more about this in the discussion, but as we now have 12 elements of the comprehensive plan, with the 12th most recently being the forestry and natural resources plan, we have for some time identified a need for a better part of a year plus, a need to accomplish several things, or to help bolster the comprehensive plan in several ways. And that's really to help modernize it, to provide greater flexibility, to really kind of make the plan more people-centric, have it be more like approachable and accessible by everyone. And then thinking about potential improvements to how thematically the various elements within the plan can be organized. As part of that, or in addition, as we've started the scoping of this work, we see a tremendous opportunity in establishing and creating an introductory chapter to the overall comprehensive plan that can really tie together and weave together the various elements. But it can also provide a way to address some of the more current and pressing issues and priorities in the county that aren't yet consistently addressed or incorporated into all 12 of the elements, right? Like climate change, racial equity, economic resiliency, just to name a few. So that would be a major component of it, thinking through an organizational framework and how to have the different elements of the comp plan better relate to each other. And then really starting the transition towards phase 2 through the scoping for an update of the general land use plan. So we're thinking about this in 2 phases, and phase 1 would really focus on those first couple points. We would scope out what the approach could be to updating the development map and booklet. And then in the second phase, we'd really be diving into undertaking an update to the general land use plan and then implement the proposed organizational framework. And then finally, the third long-range planning priority here is the multifamily reinvestment study. This was a study that we had paused during the missing middle housing study in order to intensify our efforts there and really allow us to complete that body of work. But this study actually has its origins back in the Housing Conservation District, established around circa 2017. And really, we see this work as being just so important in terms of really addressing, the need and interest in reinvestment in some of our multifamily residential areas, particularly the RA districts that are seen here on this slide. The number of objectives that we hope to accomplish through MRS are several, and several of those are shown here. Establishing a policy guide for what the future vision is for these older multifamily residential areas across Arlington that aren't necessarily spoken to by sector plans or area plans, et cetera. The establishment or creation of design guidelines and recommendations that would really help staff, it would help the commission, and it would help the development community and the broader community in thinking through or looking at development proposals and hopefully moving to the right place on that. And then our zoning ordinance, not to get too technical, there are some opportunities for improvement and reconciliation in how affordable housing expectations or requirements or permissions are currently built into the RA districts and other sections of the ordinance. And so we see an important opportunity through this study to be able to help us reconcile some of those differences and then other strategies as may be identified. So just moving quickly through the zoning studies, similar or slightly greater number of zoning studies that we anticipate for 24 as we did last year. Thankfully, it's the good work of our comprehensive planning team and others. The board this month approved the first 2 amendments on this slide entailing green building requirements and elder housing affordability along Columbia Pike in the form-based codes. But looking ahead later this spring, we'll also be working on amendments to CO Roslyn that would allow in certain circumstances densities to exceed 10 FAR. Which is in part tied to the county's recent announcement about the sale of the Central Place office building on top of the metro. And going back to some of the RA districts as well, particularly an initiative that is coming out of Arlington, but we would want to scope it so that it is so that we're exploring other RA districts as well. But really looking at some of the challenges that our zoning ordinance currently presents in terms of building setbacks and nonconformities, which is placing limits and direct limits on the ability of homeowners to make what some may consider, minor improvements and alterations to their homes in a way that they actually now have to go to the BZA for that permission. And so wanting to really undertake some important zoning study work to see how we can perhaps provide a more direct and efficient avenue for that. We anticipate having at least one site plan come forward. We'll be asked to consider additional height that is actually going to require us to go back into the zoning board, allow that increased height because that district does not currently permit it as is. And speaking earlier about Barcroft and our current work on the multifamily, the master financing and development plan, the second half of the year, again, we would be expecting to advance any code amendments for the commercial or neighborhoods form-based codes to be able to follow through on any policy or vision updates brought forward this summer. And I just briefly wanted to identify, a number of zoning studies that were on our work plan last year as well. We did not get to in 2023. We still wanted to just flag them in sort of in a parking lot sort of space, if you would. But these, in comparison to the zoning studies we had just considered, these are all have dates as TBD and would not be things we would be expecting to move forward immediately. And then just to call out here the number of other planning initiatives that are led by others beyond CPHD planning, which we either are ongoing, completed, but initiatives and work where we're providing support. And just wanted to recognize that, but particularly call out the important planning work that other departments in the enterprise are doing as well. And then finally, to close, to give a full sort of understanding of I think other aspects of our work in planning, clearly supporting commissions and committees such as the committee that's assembled here this evening. But there are many others that you can see here on this slide as well. Very excited about some staff training and professional development opportunities this year, especially just to call out GARE and the Council of Governments are co-hosting an equitable development mini-series. So we have a number of staff within planning, but then also across other departments in the county, I think close to 20 who are going to be participating in that opportunity this spring. So very excited about that. And the ongoing review of adjacent jurisdictional plans as they are presented to us. So thank you for your patience and your attention. Concludes my presentation for tonight, but definitely look forward to discussion and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I was very pleased. That was my favorite. That was my favorite. Everybody here knows that was my favorite. Ronna's on here. You laughed out loud. It was, yeah. Ronna laughed out loud.
Exciting to me.
Yeah.
It's important though.
It was important.
Very
and I
important.
That one. So sorry that was not, here it is again for our pleasure, but sorry that was just wasn't on your slide of what goes on internally. You were supporting here, but that was my favorite.
The sanitary sewer
Yeah.
plants, right? Yeah, it's in the.
No, I know, but see, it's a supported by, it wasn't led by us. So sorry, Anthony, that was my favorite, even though it's outside your division.
No offense to you.
Okay, so anybody have any questions? Eric?
Oh, sure. But why don't you go around?
Eric has questions. I'm sure you have questions as well.
3 questions. The RA district study that you mentioned toward the end of the presentation, where people are having to go to BZA, is that's the same issue that has, for example, Fairlington residents going to BZA for purely internal renovations, but it requires the use permit, I think, because of the non-conforming setbacks. Okay, glad to see that that's on the work permit. I know that there are some members of the BZA that are gonna be happy to see that too. Then I didn't see anything here about the issue that generated certainly a number of letters to us, or at least I missed it, if I did, and that's the possibility of a lot coverage study. Was that buried somewhere? Or not buried isn't the right word. Are you using a different word for it?
Subsumed.
Or subsumed, thank you. Anything else here?
No, that's a great question. It's not, the reason why you didn't see it, you didn't find it, is it's not in here, at this time. In terms of name or calling
It's
it
like
something,
saying that there are, the one line of the V is longer because there are more geese on that side, but, thank you.
in terms of calling it, what name, I think what we, coming out of the expanded housing options conversation last spring, I think that, not thinking about it in terms of a lot coverage study, but potentially thinking about it in terms of a low residential development study.
Okay.
And what, to go beyond just the parameters of coverage, right?
Okay.
There are other parameters, for lack of a better word, whether it's building height, whether it's setbacks, whether it's density, that could potentially be encompassed in a study of that type. I think the reason why it's not here is really goes back to, the 5 key considerations, and the one about really seeing through and advancing items that were in our long range planning work program last year that we have not yet been able to advance, and wanting to progress those before adding new bodies of work, so to speak.
Well, I'm actually glad to not see it. I'll get into why that is when we get to comments, but just the teal spending time in the question stage. Thank you. And then the third question I have is if that comp planning vacancy were to be filled instead of eliminated, are you in a position to give us any insight as to which of the projects that are TBD or 2025 could be moved forward in time?
And just to clarify, so you're speaking about the associate planner vacancy, comprehensive planning team?
That the staff proposed budget would eliminate.
Yeah, so there's two, so there's two.
I am talking
one on
about
the
the
comprehensive,
comprehensive.
yes. So for that,
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception is that about these like future looking studies, that's almost entirely in Jen Smith's team, right? That the current planning is really focused on responding to use permits and site permits. If I'm wrong about that, I actually would love the guide, the clarification.
I mean, I think it's a generally fair characterization. I will say though that certainly, I will say though that current, and I'll allow Jen to speak to this in a moment, but in our long range planning work, it's been our tradition, and we think there's great value in incorporating current planning staff into those initiatives, because, we want to make sure we're certainly thinking about things from a policy basis, but all of the staff on the current planning team, the supervisors and manager, provides important insights into what works, what might work, or what has worked well when it comes to the development and the implementation. So I would agree, it's largely comprehensive planning, but I don't think there's anything we do on those long range planning studies that also doesn't involve some of current planning time. With that, I'll turn to Jen for the other part of your question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel, for the question. And, one way that I would probably frame this back is that our associate planners have the ability to, work on multiple projects and support our senior planners, principal planners, who are more of project leads on major studies. So I would anticipate that if we were able to have an additional resource back, it probably helps us perhaps reevaluate what timelines we are presenting for completion, and such that we might be able to, with additional resources, perhaps move a little bit more efficiently, and then be able to move on to the next piece. I think it probably a little bit of a challenge for us at the moment to say that we would just naturally be taking on another major study led by an associate planner.
That's fair. I appreciate especially the nuance as to the level of staff support and how that impacts things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
I got a couple.
Okay.
So on the FTE, you said those positions have been vacant since around summer, fall. Has HR been actively recruiting? Like, you have had interest or difficulty getting those positions filled, or?
The concise answer is so those vacancies really arose kind of really at the time where the very early budget discussions for fiscal 25 began. And so based on some of the early information and insights we were gaining, and in discussions with our leadership about, what the component of our proposed budget, we made a decision to basically not pursue recruitment at that time, pending decisions about what the manager's final proposed budget would be. So hopefully that, I think.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, because personnel is part of my, job description too. So I relate to the struggle of clinging on to these FTE, hoping that they survive the budget.
Last year, there was an issue around one position that was going to be cut. Can you refresh my recollection about what that was or what happened at the end?
Yeah, it was, so that there was another associate, actually, if I go to this slide, so there was an associate planner position, basically it was a vacancy being created by a retirement. And so that was put forward as a budget cut, that did get included as part of the adopted budget. And so that last year, that brought us down from 9 associate planners down to 8. And so with the 2 vacancies now, if both those associate planners are reduced, that would bring our tally down to 6.
Yeah, and I was the fee analysis, you mentioned that. What were the preliminary? I was curious.
So the preliminary findings were that, and happy to get into more discussion and detail on this on Monday, but really that the premise of the analysis was to look at all of the individual application types, that planning, zoning, IS inspection services, environmental and Department of Environmental Services, all of their different fees and the associated applications, and really just estimate or calculate, what our level of cost recovery is when you look at the cost of staff time doing that work versus the fee that we're collecting. And I'd say, the findings were that it's mixed, right? There are certain fees that we're tracking pretty closely on in terms of, a balance or equilibrium. There are a number of other fees where our cost recovery is well below what the cost of that time is. And then there's certain instances where we're recovering more fee than the cost. So
yeah, that makes sense to me because, again, another part of, I work at DI, by the way. So we have all these permits and fees for developers. And so I know that there's that kind of trade-off between charge for the developers and do we get back at the end of the day. So yeah, that makes sense to me. Would there be any plan to kind of right-size some of those fee prices accordingly? So you would kind of level that out a little bit more, or?
Yeah, I mean, that you'll see that in the materials and a presentation Monday night at Planning Commission. And we can go into more detail then in terms of what planning's approach was to fee amendments and fee recovery broadly. And then I believe zone will be joined by zoning staff as well to could speak to their approach. So yeah,
I know it's not a one size fits all. So it's a lot of work. That's all I got.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
First, I want to thank you for all the work that your team does. It's incredible, the impressive that it is. I'm looking at your historical staff trends, and it looks like obviously you're going to, for FY25, you'll be short, I suppose, potentially to the staff, and yet I'm looking at your year-over-year pipeline, and obviously it's staying consistent. And also I'm seeing in some studies that they're being delayed. How do you plan to keep up with a piece of work? I'm sort of concerned how you're going to keep up and sort of strategic planning you're doing to keep afloat, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and your earlier remarks. I'll turn to Aaron Schreiber in a moment to speak to, I think, what he's seeing on some of the cadence of the reviews of the applications overall. And so the numbers themselves tell one story, but then, there are certain instances where projects perhaps have moments where they stall or they pause for a long duration, for whatever reason, right? And that helps us on a staff side. But should we continue to see a high level or an elevated level of activity? Again, I think some of the strategies we would employ there would be to look at, are there members of our other teams who potentially have capacity, or we can refocus their time to assist on the development review? Or do we just need to, consider the potential that some of the review is going to take more time? But Aaron, I don't know, I'll turn it over to you if you'd have more insights you'd want to share, in particular on, I think, what you're seeing in terms of the life cycle of a site plan entitlement and sort of the fits and starts that we might be seeing on some of these projects.
Sure. So, I mean, with the volume, you can even just focus on the 10 active site plans that we have going right now. And we have a number of principal planners who lead those. Each of those are typically in a different stage. So we do focus very intensely on the individual workload.
Jane, your camera's on. Wait,
Sorry.
Sorry, Aaron, your camera's on, Jane?
Yep.
Thanks.
So
Sorry, Aaron.
no problem. What we do is we do very much focus on the staff capacity of the individual planners. We do try and hold a number of projects. So what you've seen is a lot of changing of some of our planners based upon where some of those projects are in their life cycle. So what we try and limit the amount of active projects that planners are bringing to the board at any one time. But it's a challenge, and it is a lot of shuffling, and you've seen a lot of all hands on deck. And even as of the February meeting, I think the commission got to see Cedric Sutherland for the first time. So this is giving us an opportunity, a little bit by necessity, where associate planners are starting to pick up site plan projects as well. So it's a high volume, but we really do I think a pretty good job of balancing out those cases. But there's only so far we can go before we start doing things like Anthony mentioned, where we start looking to other staffing resources to assist. Because in addition, you'll also see me taking a number of projects to the board. I even believe Anthony might be doing one here sometime this calendar year. So it's a lot of sharing, but it is a high volume for sure.
I just want to follow up with one thing. And again, you guys do incredible work. The reason I'm also asking is because I was yesterday at the Arlington Library at an event for Black History Month, and I was talking to community members, and they were worried about, the pace of gentrification, and also about Barcroft, because some of them were feeling like they were going to get displaced, and they haven't really heard back about what was going on with the plans. And then I hear community members, from Pine Langston Boulevard, like they want to save the Lee Center. And so I wonder, there's so much work going on, and perhaps, the community isn't hearing what's happening exactly. And I wonder if there could be more of a, to get better communication with the community as well. But you guys have so much going on already. I just wonder what else could be done as well.
I mean, thank you for those perspectives and insights. I mean, I think on Barcroft, I understand, and I think there has been certainly a question out there in terms of what's happening, just because I think the progress in getting to where we are now has taken probably longer than what was initially understood or perceived. But on that project in particular, I expect there will be a lot of attention and a lot of forward progress. I think in an exciting way over the next few months into later this year.
I'm sorry, may I just jump in? I remember Bryna last year had indicated that she wanted to find more opportunities to be able to do this additional engagement, and that certainly puts strain on your resources. But is there a way for maybe Bryna's group to be able to support?
That's actually Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's a great question. I appreciate it because just and going back to, again, to Barcroft, just Friday night. And whether it's Brian, like whether it's the county manager's office, team of community and public engagement, or our own department that has a community engagement group, communications and public engagement group led by Erica Moore. That team just this past Friday night was out at Barcroft for a pop-up event, you know, looking to engage and be able to connect with, you know, residents. And, you know, 1,300 plus units today, it's probably not possible to connect with everyone, but opportunity, we do lean heavily and we benefit greatly from other team members within the department and perhaps within the organization that can help. So that it's not always the planners, and in many instances, it's not the planners doing all of the direct engagement or a lot of the engagement. We certainly do some, but we have certainly additional support there and leadership.
Do you have a question? Did you have a question?
No, I'll speak later after.
Okay. Oh, wait, Jim. Let's go back around.
Following up again on staffing, are these two positions lost, or are they just not being filled? And then in future year, budget year, if once things turn around, they could then be released and go ahead and fill it, and we have to make a case to get another FTE.
Yeah, so if I understand the question, I think the question is, are these being cuts? Would these be cuts or would they be freezes? Based on the manager's budget proposed this weekend, they'd be cuts. And so if they're cut, right, that would bring us, as part of the adopted budget, that would bring us down to, you know, 19 planners. And when you count for other positions, 27 total FTEs in the division. That would be the starting point assumption we would have going into fiscal 26.
Problem I always have with this is that, because I used to do hiring and budgeting things too, and it's like, you always want to preserve what you have, even if you don't fill it, because it's always way more difficult to make a case to be seen. The other thing is CPHD, I've always seen it as revenue positive group. And every time an entitlement goes through, the property value goes up. Every time the project gets completed, rateable, you know, it goes up. So, you know, one project more than pays for work done on it, and everything else is going to CPHD. So the more that you get the pipeline, more revenues come in with the account. Being on just most basic terms. So I personally find that very, very frustrating that we're being penny wise and pound foolish when it comes to cuts for this group. The other thing I'm concerned about is if not, I understand how you're working to balance out the work and keep things going, but if it ends up being work-life balance isn't what it should be because work keeps coming in and people are asked to do more. If you start having turnover because of that, that introduces even further inefficiencies because anybody new comes up has to learn, and there's always that learning curve. And until they're up to speed, they're just not going to be as productive as somebody who's been here for a few years. So yeah, it's a frustration that this is, I've never seen planning groups, the groups really cut, as I said, they are perfectly positive. So that's my rate. So
Thanks, Jim.
But going to more substantive things, I like some Boulevard. Surprisingly, I'm raising that one. We do need to do implementation, and again, reason why that I'm a little nervous by seeing TBD because we have projects along that corridor that are ready to pop that really need to have that guidance in place for them to move forward. Affordable housing, and that's because that corridor, that's what we're really feeling with. There's a lot of potential affordable housing coming online, and they're waiting. They're really waiting, and we need to move ahead on that. Again, it's great for the county. It hits so many county priorities, comp plan priorities in order to have that happen, but we have to get those zoning changes, law changes in place for those to move ahead. So the TBD makes me nervous.
And if I could, no, I appreciate that. And if I could reinforce and then maybe ask Jen as well to just provide a little bit more context on this. But I think based on the actions that the board took in the fall, there's the ability for particularly any of the sites at the major nodes that's large enough to pursue site plan development. I believe we have the tools in place and the avenue is there for them to pursue that. This body of work here is really focused on the more constrained sites where we are thinking that it may be beneficial to provide other options that perhaps are not as at the same scale as site plan in terms of the process. But Jen, would you like to confirm that or say?
Anthony, yeah, Anthony, I think that covers it well. We really have the tools in place for handling those larger projects, and I think those are probably will account for the sites that we're hearing interest being piqued. So I think we're in a good spot. I'm happy to field any additional questions, but it's really what we teed up as for those constrained sites. And that's really not where we're hearing, a lot of activity, but we still would like to explore some alternative tool from the site plan process, just given, again, the constraints on those smaller sites, and thinking that the site plan might not be the best alternative to by right development. So we're looking to explore what other alternatives are. And we're hoping that work is some work that will be underway this year. I think we just need a little bit more time to give some confidence in terms of what that timeline looks like.
Right, because we will be reaching out to some of the larger sites where the Navy can go to reinforce what you're saying. But we also think there are some of the smaller sites that really have been waiting. They are developable. They have people who want to redevelop. They just haven't been doing anything because they're just waiting. So we can talk with them and see, because we can give you feedback then on how many are out there. That might help on what's going on. Changing gears yet again. When we had that at the last planning commission meeting, that duplex we had to deal with, which showed one of the gaps that had to go through site plan, which is crazy. That's another thing that you're looking at the RA districts. Can we somehow, as part of that, look at the RA districts to streamline so we don't have the threat of McMansions going up in a place where we can have multifamilies? Just because it's so much easier to just run ahead and build a $2 million McMansion rather than a duplex, triplex, or larger, which could happen in those groups. That strikes me, it should be relatively easy to do. It shouldn't be as controversial as EHO was. Nia's nodding, she's in the neighborhood where that happened. She knows what it's like. I don't think we're going to have the pushback we did with EHO for something like that, but there's a crying need for it because it's unfinished. It's an unfinished.
I think we'll certainly take that feedback back and consider if there's a place, where it would make sense to consider its inclusion. And we heard the comments this weekend from the board and from the commission previously. So we hear the interest there, and we just need to see how we might be able to.
Smaller sites, people want to build on them.
Right. I mean, part of it too is scale, and there are still some sites remaining like in North Ballston, but it's not a tremendous amount. So like if there's a way to technically go into the code and provide that opportunity that is right sized for what we think is the amount of volume that might happen over years or decades.
If it became streamlined, you'd see more, because we have a lot of these little triplexes that are in those districts that go back to the 1950s that are ready, ripe for redevelopment, but there's sort of no real incentive to do it. And you can get way more people on that. Changing again.
You're about to. This is your last one. Okay.
So biophilic cities, we've been edging towards giving better, more defined terms for biophilic, because I know we are always frustrated at site plans. When biophilic elements come in, we know what we like, we know what doesn't quite make it, but there's no real guidance for developers as to what's going to pass muster and what's not. And I don't want to straitjacket them and say, you check the box and you're done, because creativity can come up on that, because it's still an evolving concept. But is there something more than just biophilic that we can start creating that can give even about guidance, but ideas and encourage that flowering of ideas for biophilia, so we can have it develop more robustly. Because we all, I think, agree now that it's an important part of site plans going forward. And we're always raising.
Well, that's a great question. I might actually turn to Chris Kreider to speak briefly to, some of, I think, what you just spoke to and how the commission's trying to address that from your seats, and then how staff and Chris and his team working with applicants along with others in that space.
Yeah, thank you. We're working on several fronts. One, we do have a core team that is sort of carrying forward the Biophilic Cities resolution. Many of you are aware of that when that was passed a few years back, and looking at, what are those indicators and how are we advancing it throughout the county resources. The other area that we're looking at is, as Anthony mentioned earlier, is updating the reference guide to landscape standards. And that was done in 2000 and I think 2017 was the last time it was updated. Since then, we've changed our process. But the reason I bring that up is because that will be an opportunity to add references to best practices around nature walls versus green walls and things of that nature. So we look at that initiative as an opportunity to sort of pull in more of the things that we are learning and share those. This guide is very useful to landscape firms that are, employed for these developments, and they see this as a roadmap in terms of how to get their landscape plans approved. And so it's been very useful. It's ready for an update, but I totally agree that we could introduce some of these elements that have come about in the last few years and include them as a reference point. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if
We'll come back
go
around.
around.
Yeah, that's
one
fine.
more.
Eric.
Sure, I'll go ahead. A couple of questions for you. So I was looking at the work plan from last year. There were a couple of things that dropped off that were completed. So there was a note about an accessory dwellings review, an affordable housing ordinance review. They're not on the work plan this year. Can you just talk to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So and thank you for paying that close attention to the year-over-year comparison.
The homework.
So on the accessory dwelling reviews, I think that point, or on that topic in particular, I believe that was sort of flagged as something that would be good to sort of get back to in the future. I think over the past several years since the latest amendments that the board had approved to allow accessory dwellings and detached units, we work closely with our research team to kind of see what the numbers are on the activity on the permitting side. And it's like night and day in terms of how, on an annual basis, how many accessory dwellings are being approved since that latest amendment compared to the number of accessory dwellings that were approved in the first 10 years or 9 years of the permissions. So I think for those reasons and others, we didn't really see that as top priority. On the affordable housing ordinance update or study, there was work that was done internally by our housing staff last year. And so there's some analysis and some findings that came out of that work. But there was also a recognition that any changes to our local affordable housing ordinance that's nested within the zoning code would also require legislative changes at the Commonwealth level, which perhaps now is not the most amenable or time to pursue those. And so I think for that reason, primarily, it was something that, whether it should have dropped off or whether it should have been like I think is a fair question, but hopefully that provides some context.
No, I mean, I appreciate that. We're certainly not going to get change this year, and we're not going to get one next year with the current makeup, General Assembly, Governor's Mansion. It just does seem to me, I certainly can't speak for staff and what your views are on reexamining it. I know that there's tremendous interest in the community, certainly at every planning commission meeting I've been at since last May, it sort of comes up. I'll think that's an ordinance question, as far as on-site units, the level of the contribution. And I remember when I was in the Housing Commission, we got, I think it was Russell who gave a presentation on sort of the initial findings. I think that's what you're speaking to. I think I'm of the opinion that if the county board were to determine that they wanted to revisit that with the legislative delegation, sort of a multi-year effort. It's a big political conversation. I know we'll certainly have a lot of stakeholders in the community, especially our development community, which is going to have a lot of opinions about that. I also think the scoping of that is going to take some time to think about, because there's not just, it's not a binary thing. It's levels of contribution. You try to require on-site units. Like it's a layered conversation. I think that takes some time. So I definitely understand the desire, if I were in your position, to sort of limit scope, given what the managers proposed with staffing. But on the other hand, if we're going to do this, I think it would be not necessarily responsible of the board, if they wanted to do this in 2 to 3 years, not to be thinking right now. We sort of have to start that work at some point, because there's going to be an election, coming up, and the makeup of Richmond may be more favorable to Arlington, or may not be. So,
but doesn't this go to where we were talking, I think last year, or maybe even the year before, budget wise, where we were, I think it was your chairmanship, where we were talking about this as EHOs were being developed, where maybe we should be thinking about opportunities to contract out some portions of it to be able to ease the burden on your department, where it makes sense to like scope out some parts of this to get stuff going. I don't know if you guys were, you remember, right?
Yeah, it's about using contract work funds,
Or they can do some of like
Consultant,
consultant funds to kind of get some of this stuff going, because we're at 33 plus projects, things that are in the pipeline.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, timing issues, like we don't want to be kind of behind the 8 ball. Is there opportunity, or where could that opportunity lie, I guess?
Generally, or on this particular?
On this issue.
I mean, so on this issue, like the work, so again, I think that it's probably most appropriate to have this conversation with a fuller group, including our housing staff, our colleagues who actually were working closely. They did have consultant support to do that analysis and study on kind of the current state of the affordable housing ordinance. And so, I mean, I think it's a fair question, right? But I also think it probably warrants additional conversation to really, try to define what is our 2 to 3 year plan in this space, and then what would, if however we define success, right? And with the estimated time, what do we need to do between now and then to get there, and who needs to be involved?
I think if I can just jump in, I think that I absolutely agree with you. I think that's right, because, anybody who knows about the ordinance, it's like the ordinance, but I think you're right. It's like, what problems are you solving? Like on site, like that's a conversation, right? And there are pluses. I'm of the opinion there are pluses and minuses. There are definitely trade-offs when you have that conversation, right? But then also the level of the contribution is sort of adjacent and very much part of that as well. And obviously we have the analysis from last year, which is essentially saying, up front, we're getting all this money and we can leverage it more easily and effectively and efficiently. Over the long term, we're getting a lot less value actually, because those on-site units are very valuable as time kind of marches on and property values increase. So I definitely agree with scoping, but it's a resource issue for you all. So I have other questions.
How
I'm
many
happy
do
to
you
wait.
have? Because
I'll
Jim
do
is
one
at the
more.
bar.
I will
Okay.
do one more. I think this goes in line, Anthony, you're saying about not adding anything else planned, but I did see that we didn't have anything about East Falls Church. That certainly came out of the planning discussions. So I'm going to assume that that's probably a decision not to add anything to the board at this point.
I mean, at this point, again, it's not hidden anywhere here. It's just not here. And I think a key additional reason why it's not here is, I think staff's perspective coming out of the actions the board took in November on the area plan. We see that, there's value in revisiting East Falls Church in so much as there would be a commitment and sort of clear and explicit interest by the other necessary parties that need to be part of having anything happen there, which is inclusive of WMATA, but it's also inclusive of VDOT. And to date, those conversations haven't gotten to a point that would, I think, make good sense in terms of really initiating some intensive planning activity there. I think there's conversations that, you know, can be had and probably will be had at some point this year, reaching out to VDOT and WMATA and others, and then seeing if some momentum can be built. But until that, you know, happens and we get that clarity of sense, it's not currently factored into our work. Sure.
Question? From you,
Does that have any questions? Can I make a comment?
if you'd like,
Yeah. I would.
why not? Go ahead, your time. Go ahead, your time.
Thank you. So I'm Bob Benson. I'm with Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, and I'm speaking on their behalf tonight. Last Friday, we sent a letter to the county board and the planning commission and director of CPHD. The letter, we strongly recommended that the upcoming CPHD work plan include a study on reducing allowable lot coverage to drive room for planting trees. We also said that it should apply to multifamily and single-family residences. It should address height and setback issues and impervious surface impacts. And it should be funded in the FY25 budget. And that work should get started, preliminary work should get started now. And a commission like mine could help with that. It's in our charge, for example, we could have dialogue sessions that the commission could hold to kind of supplement the efforts of the staff in an official way. You all probably are aware that this is a long-standing request going back years and years. And it had strong support then, and it still has strong support from citizen groups, from civic associations, from commissions like mine, and from county board members themselves. So why is this so important? First of all, it's part of the Forestry and Natural Resources Plan, which was just approved by the county. And as you showed on your slide, it's now part of the comprehensive plan. It's number 12, but in our view, it's not 12th in priority. It's of equal priority, all the things you're talking about tonight. It also supports recommendations in the Chesapeake Bay ordinance. We see the reality that Arlington is continuing to grow in density, and that's not going to stop with an ever increasing rate of development of single and multifamily dwellings. But that is juxtaposed with a tree canopy in crisis, and I don't use the word crisis loosely. Recent studies show that it's gone down in volume around 20% over the last 10 to 15 years. That's very concerning. Very concerning. That has the obvious environmental impacts. Of course, we're all aware of the climate impact. It has major stormwater impacts. So while the county is spending millions on stormwater mitigation, we're losing the trees that are holding the water in the soil. But it also, the tree canopy has, the loss of that has social impacts, economic impacts, and public health impacts. I worked at EPA and I worked on environmental justice programs there. And you had environmental justice as a priority in your plans tonight. And you know, the communities in Arlington that have the most meager tree canopies are the disadvantaged. So this is a priority issue for us as we redevelop. I can't emphasize enough how strongly my commission feels about this. Our vote on this letter was unanimous. And we really feel that it should be part of the work plan because we're losing the tree canopy too quickly to wait. In our letter, we say the FNRC rejects the notion that we must make a choice between expanded housing options and retaining and expanding tree canopy. We need to expand our tree canopy, not just maintain it, but expand it to get to a point where it will survive. The FNRC feels that it's possible to do both, but this necessitates intentional policy decisions to ensure that adequate spaces are available on lots for trees to grow and thrive. Most of our trees are private. So we feel that we need this lot coverage review now to enable the county to meet both its housing and its tree canopy priorities and have them be complementary, not have one met at the expense of the other. And frankly, not to put this off again. It's been put off and put off and put off for years. I think the time is right now to address it. One thing that occurred to me in hearing your great presentation tonight was not to look at this perhaps as a brand new, high resource intensive analysis, but rather to figure out ways to integrate it into some of the topics that you've already got in your plan. And to turn to citizens and citizen groups like mine to help you do that and draw upon, of course, the Department of Environmental Services to help do that. So that the issue can be addressed now. We can get started tomorrow. I'll leave you with the thought that every week we wait, every month we wait, every year we wait, we lose more and more of our tree canopy. We're going to get to a point where it's a critical mass. We don't have enough to be able to maintain the sort of natural ecosystem in Arlington that we've all come to appreciate. So my commission argues that this would be a good time to address this further.
Is there a way to integrate, or are there places where this is being integrated to address this?
Tree canopy more broadly.
Tree canopy and the integration of some of the recommendations around lot coverage, both of those issues. I know we talked about what Daniel brought up, but is there a way to kind of address tree canopy in particular? So that's a long-standing. As you were looking at some of the other issues, so embedding it, if you will, right, in those considerations, even if it's not a standalone kind of, how we're moving forward in a standardized way, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly go back and take a look. Nothing is immediately jumping to mind, right? Because I think in terms of the areas in which lot coverage, right, I think are focused on in terms of impacts or benefits on both ways, really in the low residential areas. And when we get into site plan development, the board is often modifying lot coverages, but because there are other strategies in place, both through stormwater management and through tree canopy and tree plantings, that sort of balance that out. But not seeing anything in our current preliminary proposal that really focuses on those low residential areas in a way that would, I think, address the opportunity to.
Well, I think I'm just kind of like.
Could talk to staff, perhaps.
Perhaps. I'm sure that they probably already are, right?
We are.
I guess I'm just kind of trying to turn this comment into a bit of a question so that there can be some response here. For the others, like I know Nia is very.
Getting ready to say.
I know Nia's about the Nia. I was giving the preamble to Nia's comment. So here comes Nia. And she's gonna ask about.
Okay. Yeah, I would align myself with Mr. Benson's comments, and the concern being that it doesn't have to be a primary point, but it needs to be incorporated somewhere because we have waited for so long. And as I mentioned, when we heard the FNR plan, that until we do something that we start to address privately owned property, we're never going to be able to do anything to really save our trees, nothing. So there's just a lot of work that still needs to be done, and it may not be necessarily through the department, but through other means working together. But somewhere it needs to be addressed that it still is important, because if it's omitted, it doesn't seem to be important. And even going back to Jim's comment where, biophilia and the tree canopy can be brought in together. Which, somewhere in here, it has to at least have a mention so that it appears as though it's important. Because it was important when it was discussed as part of the plan when it was approved. Going back to the staffing issues, when I was listening Saturday to the board and I heard, the two positions, I was like, oh my God, who is it? Well, I don't know, lose anybody. I wasn't thinking that there were vacancies. So coming from a different world than government employment, the reality is that in most other sectors right now, you are seeing jobs eliminated left and right. You are seeing the remaining people who are left standing doing 3 jobs together. The reality is, in at least the profit world, I don't think that's going to change for a while, even when the economy starts to, quote, rebound, because people who like to make money will look and say, well, gosh, these people are already doing 4 or 5 jobs. Why do we need to add them back in? So having said that, in terms of public perception, you know, it's difficult for when you have staff, which I regard highly here, and I believe we need them. The reality is that outside of here, there are a lot of people that are like, they're losing their jobs and things, so they may or may not have a lot of empathy for this. So having said that, you may end up not being able to do those jobs. And then I guess my question becomes, you don't have to answer this tonight, but just thinking out loud, internships, working with high schools to bring students in and out just to help with some things and maybe then to get them excited about possibly working in government or things like that, so that those things, if you have to lose them, can at least get to a toehold in some means for the future. And again, there's a perception issue out there right now with, well, I'm happy to see that you have so many projects coming still through the pipeline that, you know, Amazon is paused. This project is paused. We've approved all these projects and they seem to be paused, not because of anything other than economics, like financing, you know, interest rates, the cost of materials and things like that. So it is a perception issue. While you have these numbers there, the perception out there, away from this building, is, well, wait a minute, these places have been approved, but they're not going anywhere. So, and then last but not least, going back to what Jim said about that unfinished part of this, what was it, 1129 Vermont? Is that the one that came through? You know,
Yeah, North
it's,
Utah.
yeah, North Utah,
Yeah.
whatever. It's difficult to sit there and sit through something where, you know, we've gone through this whole thing where we really want more affordable housing. And so somebody comes in and, oh, yay, they don't put a $2 million property, but instead they put 2 duplexes that are going to be 1.5 or 1.6 anyway, where that could have been 4 or 5 or 6, especially in a high density like that. So it's just, we're never going to get there if we don't start to realize that this is what some of them are going to do. That why can't we have some more, I don't know, incentive or more policy to try to get us out of that and more to what we need. So I'm done. That's it.
Okay, so I can have one quick question before we do. Listen, also, did we hear back? Leo,
He says he's good for now.
Okay.
But if he changes his mind, he will ask to speak.
okay, listen, it's 8:27. I want to give a time check to everybody. Daniel just said we're limiting it. And then you got to submit a written question. But I do want to ask you, going back to this FT issue, you know, Anthony, certainly you have the information you need to make the decisions and right how tough they are. What I guess I wanted to follow up on something that Jim said. Is there a clear nexus? Because these were positions where you weren't filling them last year, is there a clear nexus between those positions remaining vacant and the impact on the projects that were coming through? You know, the use permit and the comprehensive planning divisions. Are you able to articulate, like, because we weren't able to have these positions filled, it affected us X way? And so I guess then the thought for me is, looking at my role last year, when you go before the county manager and you say, don't cut these positions, right? Because here is the impact. And I think last year we were able to, like, very clearly say, you've got PLB coming down the pike, right? You've got all these different things happening, and if you're taking away this position, or, you know, certainly apparently it wasn't that effective since the position was taken away. But I wonder if there's a more kind of very data-driven way to say 5 projects slowed down because that position wasn't there for us. I'm surprised to hear what Mia is saying about, like, the perception, because I feel like a lot of it's this interesting dichotomy to be able to say, oh my God, everything's changing all the time so fast. There's so many development things, but then also to say there's not, like, things are getting paused and things are not moving forward. Like it kind of feels at odds with each other. But nonetheless, I just kind of think about these 2 positions, whether there is space for our commission to be able to advocate when that joint work session comes up. And is it even a proper place to advocate, because we have the information that's necessary for the advocacy piece in that space, right? We can talk about everything else we want to do, you know, all the places that we want to explore. But I think the best kind of way to examine it is like past this prologue. these things were impacted because that one position was gone, we can then predict that these 6 things are gonna be impacted because you're taking away 2 positions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I might turn to either Aaron or Jen to provide some, whether it's data or just whether anecdotes, but, you know, just to start with one example, right? And I think Aaron mentioned this earlier. You know, having one fewer person or one that vacant associate planner position on the use permit team, you know, has required him in certain instances to be able to take on some of the applications. So if you're looking at the county board agenda, you know, we have our current planning manager who's the author for a number of cases that have been going forward for the past several months. That's not an ideal situation because then it reduces Aaron's ability to provide that management to the overall team. As one example, I will just speak to briefly, or just to another example before I see Aaron, this video has come on. The, you know, one of the potential challenges we may be facing in the areas of special glove studies is the capacity for some of the 3D modeling and some of the urban design work, where some of our previous associate planner positions that are now vacant had that capability. And so that's partly a skill set and capability issue, and not being able to fill that vacancy may force us to, you know, consider other solutions to addressing that. But Aaron, I don't know from a current planning team, you know, any other data or anything experience that might be helpful.
Sure. So I'll just speak specifically from the current planning side, but in addition to what you just mentioned, Anthony, I would just say that it's just the timelines of projects. And it's not just only the ones that you guys are seeing that are the major site plans or the large use permit projects. It's all the administrative stuff that we're doing as well that probably you're not seeing quite often. This is more on the developer side. So they're seeing project review times take longer on the administrative reviews, some of our minor type of things, some of our administrative level elements. Those are slipping. Our times are getting a little bit longer. It's also preventing us from moving forward on some other matters that we know from a process standpoint that are on the list every year that we just haven't been able to get to. So, and that's just, again, in addition to just trying to balance what was mentioned earlier, staff burnout, trying to not have that be too prevalent an issue. So that's why you're seeing a lot of balancing and a lot of other people, such as myself and Matt Pfeiffer and others, you know, doing project review, which is kind of a new thing that we haven't seen in years past.
And may I just ask, the other part of this is like I kind of whispered over to Natasha when you guys were talking about without the pool. It feels like you're essentially saying we're like cross training other people from other divisions who didn't come into those spaces to be doing that work. You know what I mean? And so like I think that could add to the burnout. Like if I'm wanting to be on this side and I surely want to help my friends in another division, but that's not the space that I professionally want to be in frequently, then I may be looking at another job, right? Where that pool is less on me, right?
I appreciate that question, and something that we were actively discussing today and several days ago, but I think that probably comes down to a case by case basis.
Yeah.
Because I think in the planning profession, right,
Yeah.
there may be folks who actually want different types of experience and or like would want to seek that out and would embrace that opportunity. And then there may be others who like, all I want to do is like application review. I don't want to do long range planning.
Yeah.
And who they might respond differently if put in that situation.
Yeah.
So that's I think a very valid point, and it's just something that if we find ourselves in that situation, we're going to be forced to figure out how to manage that.
And this is my last question, because you know I don't usually ask a lot of questions, but this was my last one. I wonder, and this is not a critique, Aaron, at all of anything that's ever coming out of CPHD. I just wonder, is some of this like workflow and the vacancy issue that's coming up, is there a concern around some things are going to be missed? Because I know sometimes when we come to our SPRC meetings or when we're, you know, there's these conversations that are happening that may feel a little bit repetitive, or like, oh my God, why wasn't this specific issue considered? Is that an outgrowth of not having or feeling rushed because there's so much happening, and I mean, there's only so much anybody can ever do, right?
Again,
24 hours in a day.
I mean, appreciate the comment and the question really. You know, I would love to sit here and say like, we have the highest levels with our management and
Yeah,
leadership
yeah.
team of like quality control, right? In terms of making sure that everything is being evaluated and progressed the way it should be.
Right.
But
But if he's running projects, right, like there's only so much somebody can do, right?
And so, I mean, part of it I think is human nature,
Yeah.
and part of it is just, capacity versus the volume,
Right.
right? And sure, there's probably in instances where we haven't been able to as comprehensively or fully vet or review something. But I do think that's more of the exception than
Yeah.
the norm.
Yeah.
I do think that we are giving, and that comes to time.
Right.
So in order for us to do the thorough and, adequate job in reviewing it.
Yeah.
We're working with applicants to say, we appreciate your patience. It's
Right.
going to take us a little bit longer to get to that spot.
And I think, and the only reason why I ask it, not that I've seen it or I'm saying that that's happening, okay, and I don't want you to take that comment any way, shape or form, like that is a critique of what's happening, because I think you guys do excellent work. I just thinking about teeing this up for Sarah when she goes before the county manager and says, don't take these two positions, because I expect that that's probably what's gonna come from our commission is don't take these two positions, right? Don't cut these positions, find the cut somewhere else. And I think that she needs those words, whatever it is, the data, the anecdotes, the information that's necessary to show that this is probably not the place to cut, like, especially like Jim is saying, if planning is revenue positive, then let's make sure these projects are coming online as fast as possible. But you guys, Jen and Aaron both have their screens on, so I feel like they've got something very important to say in response to what I'm saying.
I'll just jump in, Aaron. I thought maybe you had something else. Okay. Devanshi, thanks for the comments. I think from a comp planning perspective, I would just want to remark that we have had an accounting of studies, on zoning, that there's only so much capacity that we've had that may have been an area where perhaps we could have done some additional work on zoning, but, it takes us longer, to initiate the next study. The same, at least at this moment, we're feeling caught up on special GLUP studies. But we had a backlog, so that could have been a potential area where some additional staff resources, again, to help bolster the work. Anthony mentioning the 3D modeling. But, I think one of the things that all of the teams are really doing quite well and in support with our communication staff, but is, reaching the community in new ways. And certainly with the equity lens that Anthony talked about, the online, for whether it's pop-up events or online engagement kind of being the newer, techniques from the traditional meetings where, come one, come all. But doing those things and trying to reach the people that are hard to reach, that takes resources. So that's another way that, it's very important work to do. We need to do that work. We're not going to stop doing that work, but it might just take, a little bit longer time, right, to prep for those kinds of events, digest from those events. We're getting really substantive volume of feedback at any kind of event, whether it's, just online engagement or in person. So that's just another way that, we may continue to do what we do and, support one another, but that could have an impact on, overall timelines, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Thanks for sharing. Aaron, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, Daniel.
I'm certainly glad to see that the RA nonconformity study in there, as I hinted earlier. I recall 6 years ago, there was an analogous situation where BZA had been indulgent of a issue with the zoning ordinance, and eventually they stopped. And I do worry that if BZA stops indulging applicants, then you sort of lose control of your own destiny, because then it becomes an RLNOW issue, and then it becomes a county board issue, and so I'm glad to see it on the work plan before BZA decides that they've had enough, and perhaps they can postpone that decision until knowing that it's on the work plan. I think that if the positions do get eliminated, and certainly, you know, I think we can do what we can do to help. Hopefully we can persuade other commissions like housing and AED to realize that it's in their best interest to not see these cuts happen. It would be nice to be able to point to something that's fairly objective as to how decisions get made about what gets backlogged. And that's not a critique or comment of staff, because what actually I'm getting at is something that the board would have to use to hold itself accountable, right? Because it's the board that, and it's partly in response to commissions, but it's also on their own motion that says, well, we need a study on this. And then that screws up your work plan, right? And it pushes something back even further, especially in an environment where we're now 2 years over in a row and losing headcount. I do really like the matrix that was last seen in the 2022 work plan. You know, take this advice or leave it. But I thought that matrix really clearly communicated the relative priority of the items that were being recommended. And I offer that in conjunction with my earlier comment about, you know, nice if there was some kind of goal that we could point to, right? You could sort of hold that up to the board and say, but look, you know, stop it with this nonsense. Give us people. I don't love the idea of expanding the townhouse type districts to allow duplexes or triplexes. There's a reason, and that's because if there isn't a way to target these kind of holdouts, or if there is a way to sort of target these kind of holdout situations, then great, right? But assuming that there's not, it sort of affects a downzoning, a de facto downzoning, right? These townhouse districts are what they are because we want townhouse density. We don't want piecemeal salami style parcelizations into things that get built as duplexes and triplexes. And if there's not a way to prevent something like that, then my recommendation to you and your colleagues would be to say thank you. We'll take it under advisement when you hear these suggestions about working on that. Maybe there's a use permit way to getting something more than townhouse level density for these things. And I think that that's consistent with what you're hearing from Jim. But I certainly don't think that the EHO direction is the direction for such a study. Again, you know, take that or leave that. That's not something that you're actually proposing for the work plan, but you are getting feedback that people would like to see it on the work plan. And in a similar light, we get to lot coverage, right? And Anthony, you of everyone here know that I have been a proponent for it, for a study like that, since it was discussions between you and me about, you know, the agenda during 2022 as we were trying to land the EHO project. So, and others know that I've been a cheerleader for it too. But there are a lot of very important contextual issues that need to be thought about. One of them is staff bandwidth, right? And another one is this litigation, right? And I would really recommend that should you be getting any pushback from, you know, horizontal, vertical from below, vertical from above, that there not be any movement in this direction until after we know the status of the EHO litigation, because I do not see such a study as being able to be done independent of the EHO ordinance, right? If it is done independent of the EHO ordinance, then all we're doing is talking about reducing lot coverage for single family homes. And that's problematic for me for a number of reasons. One of which is it loses for us the incentive to build EHOs, right? To go the Portland route of having smaller lot coverage maximums for less dense utilizations, right? You want to build a single family home, you have a smaller lot coverage ceiling than you would if you want to build a fourplex or a fiveplex. We just lose that entirely, right? But also we would be working a massive wealth transfer to the 2,000 or 3,000 single family homes that have been redeveloped over the last 20 years, right? And would all of a sudden, you know, command a massive price premium for being oversized on the other side of any kind of reduced lot coverage maximum. And I don't think that is you know, I don't think that that's something that's something that we do I don't think that's a business we should be in. So I have a lot of concerns about proceeding. I agree with everything that has been said about its importance, right? But for triage purposes and for other, you know, contextual reasons, I would really hope that as you continue to get pressure between now and when the work plan and budgets are adopted, that you would at least take a stand that anything before the litigation is settled would be premature.
Appreciate all of those points. And if I could just add just one other perspective, just take it for what it's worth in terms of consideration or thought processes. But we do view the comprehensive plan update as an opportunity to really, and potentially, and we hope in context with the county board's initiative this year in terms of the Arlington 2050 and that visioning, right? And so we have this year an opportunity and potential to have that energy and activity on defining what is the future vision for Arlington for 2050. And our process to date has been, there could be, you know, really helpful sort of outputs from those efforts that then can help inform a low residential development study that really gets that lot coverage, but then some of the other issues. And there are many other details and, you know, questions about nonconformities. And then, you know, we're talking about nonconformities in RA districts or Arlington, but, you know, not presupposing the outcomes. There is a scenario where what happens through that low residential study could create non-conforming instances. And what are the implications of that? And how are we thinking about that as part of the broader initiative?
Thank you. And I meant to add just one more thing on that point, which is that I do like the idea of wrapping it up into a broader, how did you say, low density?
Low residential.
Yeah, one of the things that occurs to me is that there are tools other than just lot coverage, right? Like permeability. And permeability does something very similar to lot coverage when it comes to a number of things, including canopy. And by wrapping up, you know, a lot of those issues into one, I think that.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, special club studies. I was on the BT when the grad students gave reports on that, so I know it is on the radar. Having chaired a number of special club studies and participated on them, of all the things we do that interacts with the communities, that's the most frustrating because it's the most insight-based ultimate thing that most communities have no clue how it works, they don't understand it, get very upset and frustrated by it. I think it's total pointless exercise because you're going to do what you want anyway, is what I keep hearing back. Even the more sophisticated CAs are frustrated by it too. And we're now shoehorning it, I think, a whole lot of things that we need to do, but we're shoehorning those into it, such as we have sector plans that are like 40 plus years old, others decades old. We're making changes within those sector plans using special club studies because we can't get to redo the sector plan. We have edge areas that are going through special club studies because the development pressures are so great that they're spilling out of the corridors or the sector plans. Then we have these other odd areas all through the county that are ripe for redevelopment, don't have a sector plan, so we do a special club study. So we're forcing this process to be a jack of all trades because we can't do a comprehensive plan for things. So we're doing these, I don't want to use the term spot development because that's a legal term, but we're doing these individual non-contextual changes for special club studies that it just, for me, it isn't really working the way I think it should be. We have like one area where we have 2 special club studies literally within blocks of each other, but they have no reference to each other. And then between it, we have an area where the property was want to redevelop. Yet we're not doing a secondary plan for it. We're doing these individual looking at it. And that's not, I think, the best way to be doing things. So going ahead, I do see seeing the special club study of the study as being a real priority because it is something that there's a growing momentum, I think, out there from the community associations, civic associations that they really don't like this. And I think it doesn't help to create trust between the county and the citizens by continuing to use this everywhere. We really have to work on it and find something better. And I don't have a magic bullet to solve it. I can totally see that. But that doesn't mean it isn't something that's going to grow in controversy is my concern.
Right.
So it is something that having on the work plan is really important and has to really be taken seriously and find a way to develop some way or ways to deal with these areas that want to redevelop and aren't in sector plan or aren't in current sector plans.
No, I appreciate all of that. It certainly echoes, I think, a lot of what we heard. And, I think thinking about sort of incremental changes, right? We've made changes recently to the process. And I think through the past few projects and studies, we've been able to streamline and gain efficiencies in terms of how long the processes have taken, right? And that's helped us work through our backlog. Correct. In terms of the study, like the substance of the study, and how that's approached and what the community engagement looks like, and if there's an education component, there's opportunity there too. But I do think, and if Kelly.
Nobody can turn that. 8:52 if you go to public comment. We have 4 public speakers for 2 minutes.
Okay, so.
Not to cut you off. Not to cut you off at all.
Yeah, Kelly, sorry about the cutoff. But there, I just.
The planning. Okay.
I will just point back to the comprehensive plan update as also being a very important, or in our eyes, a very important way to end that the glove component of it. Real opportunity to get to a better place in terms of the general land use plan, how it sort of speaks to our vision and the guidelines for future development in other areas as a way to hopefully be able to work away the need from special glove studies in many instances, if not all of them. So if we had more time.
Yeah, but now now I'm the Apollo guy. All right, here we go. You ready? 2 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Team Henschrock, President Leeway Overley Civic Association. I'm here to talk about the Lee Center, and our executive committee and our community really want to save this building. And I'm asking you to prioritize saving and renovating it. And I will share that I've had input from many people in this room, and I've had a lot of good guidance from within the community and within the county. Our goal is to develop a realistic and people-centric future for the Lee Center that could serve county residents and activities that are within the guidelines of the Langston plan, which Natasha and Jennifer worked so hard on. There's really strong support within the Civic Association. Every general meeting we have, that's all we talk about, regardless of what the topic of conversation is. We have already started doing a lot of legwork that for community engagement. We have some surveys planned, both within our community and along the Langston Boulevard corridor. We also are working with an architect who's on the Energy Committee on a pro bono basis to look at future opportunities for the building. We found the year 2000 blueprints for the renovation that was done then, and he's using those to see what looks realistic and what does not.
Okay, 10 seconds.
Yeah, so basically save, renovate. We're assessing future opportunities. We want this to be a shining example of biophilic renovation.
Perfect. Thank you. For Arlington. Wonderful. Ready? Do you have a comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill Richardson, President of Arlington Civic Association. Thanks, Natasha, for sending around the materials. I want to emphasize. Hope you have a chance to look at those in greater depth, but I want to emphasize those are comments filed not just by Donaldson, but by a number of different civic associations. They are not the only civic associations that lead on coverage. Heightened setbacks too are important. And I think just briefly to comment on some of the comments here, staffing concern, as Bob did, pretty much laid out everything I was going to say. So it's this predated this issue. Staff identified it 10 years ago as an issue that needed study, even in the case of residential teardowns then. And so it it predates all of the items on this. And Bob has explained why it's important not to be fiddling along. Subject. I think that, as Anthony pointed out, this is actually primary responsibility DPR to Forestry and Natural Resources Plan. So you've got help from them, you've got help from DES and stormwater management to integrate it with other ways of counting impervious surface there. So as Bob says, you have other people that can help. The other thing is that this is an area where we've talked to county board members in the past years about use of consultants. That might be, I gather that's been done. Sorry. Anyway, second, Daniel, I'm glad that you've always been for this too. I don't quite understand what you're saying about it. I don't think it shouldn't apply only to single family. It has nothing to do with litigation because the two are combined. The rationale for missing middle is that we're doing nothing different here.
We're moving on to David Howell. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This has been a great discussion. If you could put up slide 6, if you don't mind, Natasha. I just wanted to cover a couple of things. While you're getting that, I wanted to second everyone's enthusiasm about the comprehensive plan update. If we can't align and deconflict the priorities in the comp plan assembly, then we're working against cross purposes quite a lot and not coming up with a holistic view of where we're going. And I agree that this is an important activity timing wise because of the Arlington 2050 visioning exercise. And I hope that that can help make it easier for everyone, residents and staff, to see how these things fit together in a productive and improved way from the way we have to try to figure out how to have everything at the same time. On number 6, I just wanted to point out real quickly, item 4 reminds me, item 4 reminds me that for the PFRC, there's a document called Principles of Civic Design that's supposed to be a resource for participants. And that hasn't been updated for at least 6 years. I don't know how old it is or where it came from. It fails to mention anything about equity or biophilia. So those 2 resolutions were adopted in 2019. And that's makes it difficult for all the neighborhood representatives and others to see how all of these important themes fit into projects like the Career Center, for example. And I think that could be part of this work plan, just to update it. It's only 1 page. I've actually done an update draft.
Thank you.
So.
All right, Jason.
Hello, my name is Jason Schwartz, and I live in Arlington. And just a note, I am a renter. And from this conversation, it seems like there hasn't been that much renter input. So I'd just like to give just one person, myself, as an input renter and someone who lives in Roslyn, Boston corridor. So first of all, the importance of planning is super important. I'm definitely concerned about the shrinking size of the CPHD planning division. You know, Arlington is a growing county and with growing needs, and we need to be growing the planning division now and in the future. There's great ROIs for every single planner FTE on the 3 big things that I think about. Number 1, housing. Number 2, climate. And number 3, business case. You know, housing, you know, Arlington is spending 110 million on housing this year. You know, 1 single planner could easily generate enough housing investment that can maybe not match that, but have a multiplier effect. Same thing for climate. We know that our denser areas in Arlington are much better, you know, climate friendly. You know, 22209 zip code. Average household is 36 tons of CO2 versus the worst zip code in Arlington, which is 22207, which is 66 tons of CO2 per year. So, you know, we need planners to help make Arlington more climate friendly. And of course, the business case, you know, DC just released their downtown. Oh,
The meeting is going on.
Looks like the TV's like.
It's just the TV, but.
The TV.
Sorry, go ahead, keep going, Jason.
Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
I can hear you. Go ahead, Jason.
DC has their, downtown action plan, with different strategies and implementation that needs a lot of people involved. Arlington is doing the same policies. We need people there. I also want to just plug in need to advance studies from previous years. Those need to be at the high end. We cannot be skipping things that we had on board. Multifamily reinvestment study, super big. Lastly, with regards to tree canopy, I live in the corridor. Every single site plan, every single zoning area that doesn't happen is leaving massive swaths of surface parking or other impervious surface areas. So we need to get investment in these areas so that we can increase our green space through redevelopment. So it's like that's already being incorporated. So doing a single study on a lot coverage doesn't really make sense to me, especially for people in corridors where we need more greenery. Let's take out all the impervious surfaces on Pine Langston Boulevard, and make those buildings and green space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. That was the last couple of speakers. We only had 4 people who signed up for public speaking tonight.
Yeah, I signed up yesterday. Did I not make the cut?
I don't think we don't have you, Susan. So a written comment. We'll be happy to make sure that we all get it so we can see your comment.
Okay, will do.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you.